has survived many great disasters. Now comes the real test. Chevy Chase and his family are coming from America.
Look, bedpans.
Join Chevy Chase in National Lampoon's European Vacation, rated PG-13.
Hey everyone, Brian the Brain here, and I'm your host for this week's episode of Pantheon Plus, the offshoot podcast. Here on Pantheon, this week we're doing a little something different. Jerome at the end of last year, came up with this great idea about doing underrated sequels, and it took us a while to put our list together, but here we are. And for the next 2 months, we're going to be introducing these lists one at a time. We're not going to reveal everything ahead of time, but we're going in chronological order. So before we get into that, we would just like to ask you to leave a 4 or 5 star review for the people at the real world so people can find this podcast on Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you listen to your podcast. And you can find my co-host, Jerome, on Twitter at JeromeC1985 for now, because I know Twitter is a little iffy right now, but you can also find us on Twitter at Hero Pantheon. And Jerome, I know your list was pretty much done with. I made some minor changes towards the end, but as of right now, we're going to reveal it one at a time. And today's episode is going to be National Lampoon's European Vacation. And I've been really excited to do this episode because I think it's the most underrated vacation movie. It's the most overlooked. It has a lot of flaws, believe me, but it's got Amy Heckerling directing. And I think Amy Heckerling is probably top 2 or 3 comedy directors personally of my favorites. So I think she's a great director for comedy, and she does a great job here with the silliness. And believe it or not, Clark Griswold is not the asshole that he was in the first movie. He's actually likable. And Jerome, I know you were kind of shocked about that, considering how much you've seen in the first movie. And I know we have the same feelings about the same movie, where he's just so much of an asshole that it's not as enjoyable. But in this case, they lean towards some more of the idiotic state of Clark Griswold, and I think they kind of nailed it in this one.
I think Clark Griswold is arguably chaotic neutral in this movie, whereas in the first one, he is chaotic negative. So I think that makes a difference in how I see the movie. I think you cannot separate Clark Griswold from Chevy Chase, because Chevy Chase is so much of a persona at this point, and he's not really even acting. He's always playing some version of himself. I don't think we're ever going to see Chevy Chase. I don't think he's ever really done a movie where he's been a great actor per se, which is weird because I feel like a lot of us SNL compatriots, I feel like you can watch movies that they're in and be like, oh, well, Dan Aykroyd was really good in Driving Miss Daisy, or Bill Murray's been good in so many things. And Eddie Murphy, of course, has always, been in some really great stuff. So you look at the history of SNL, and there have been some really good performances by actors, even though an SNL performer still has never won an Academy Award, which is inexplicable to me. That being said, I think the Vacation franchise is actually pretty underrated in itself. I think if you look at the comedic graveyard of really terrible comedy sequels, you can look at Caddyshack 2, Airplane 2, Ted 2, Beverly Hills Cop 3. There are a lot of really terrible sequels out there for comedy movies, and I think it's just really hard to recapture the magic. I don't count animated movies necessarily, so if you want to, there have of course been a number of animated movies that have had some great franchises, but I think Vacation is one of the few franchises that works. And I know that that being said, I think Vegas Vacation is bad. I think the rebooted Vacation was also really bad. But I think you've got 3 really good comedy movies in this franchise. I think Vacation is good. I don't think it's as good as European Vacation. I think the crown jewel of this franchise is Christmas Vacation. I think if we put this list together 10 or 15 years ago, I actually think Christmas Vacation would have been the more logical choice, but I think this is one of those movies that has kind of been put into the Christmas canon. It's one of those movies that is just aired a ton in late November and December because of Christmas. So I no longer think you can possibly say, oh, this movie is underrated, which is unfortunate because I think it would have been great to talk about it. But in terms of underrated, I think European Vacation is much better to talk about. And I'm sure there are a number of reasons why, which we will get into now.
Really quick, you mentioned other comedies that didn't really fit the underrated bill. I have a small list here, and the reason, well, I'm not going to obviously reveal the titles upcoming, but I did pick one of the various genres. This week we're focusing on comedy. So my small list of underrated comedies goes as this: Bill and Ted 2, Ace Ventura 2, Clerks 2 and 3, American Pie 2 and The Wedding, Naked Gun 2 and 3, Austin Powers 2, Wayne's World 2, Addams Family Values, 22 Jump Street, and I know Jerome's going to just kind of bite his teeth at this one, Ghostbusters 2. I almost put that on the list as well, but that one kind of I don't know. It would have been a little too divisive, I think.
I would have rejected it because it's not underrated. It's bad. I think Austin Powers 2 is just the best of the movies. I don't think it's necessarily something
I think it's been forgotten, but I think that's the thing.
That movie was a huge hit, and I think that movie is rightfully rated as one of the better sequel comedies. I mean that movie was just enormous, and there is a version of this list that at one point did include Clerks 2. Maybe we can get into why that is not the case in a future episode. That is also something that Kevin Ford and I may be discussing at some point next year, and we may need to invite Brian on to have a full conversation. But I would say that there are definitely some comedies that are underrated, but for the most part, again, it's kind of a graveyard. I would actually say both Bill and Ted movies deserve the underrated title, so to speak. All I'm going to say, Brian, is there may or may not be a Keanu Reeves movie that we will be discussing sometime in these 2 months. But let's turn our attention to European Vacation.
Yeah, so it came out July 26, 1985. Budget of $17 million, and it grossed 49 domestic, so it was a big hit. 49 domestic, of course, nowadays is what, 80, 90 million? So, I mean, for a comedy, that does really well, and it actually knocked off Back to the Future, which was riding its train, and it derailed it for only 1 week, and then the next week Back to the Future was back on top for like the next 8 weeks. So kind of weird to see that European Vacation was like the only competition at the time for Back to the Future when it was making all that money. But interesting note here is that Harold Ramis, director of the original, declined to come back because at the time he was working on Ghostbusters 1. Amy Heckerling took over. She at that point did Johnny Dangerously, and before that, obviously, the big one, Fast Times at Richmond High. But the thing is here, well, down the line, I don't know the exact timeline, but the weird thing is they kind of had an affair and had a kid, and they kept it secret for years up until recently because Ghostbusters Afterlife kind of like brought some of that back to light. If you kind of dig through some of the articles out there about all the connections between Harold Ramis and his son and the true nature of what that story was really about, they kind of hinted at the Amy Heckerling thing about having a kid. So I thought that was really interesting how both directors ended up having a kid, the two first directors of this franchise. So that was really interesting reading that. But the other, obviously, Anthony Michael Hall was filming Weird Science at the time, couldn't come back as Rusty, so they just replaced both of them. This is where it gets kind of interesting because at this point, once this happens, I kind of think each movie becomes its own alt-world thing because the kids keep changing in age and size and looks and everything. So to me, this is like, Earth 2 Griswolds on their European Vacation. And then once we get to Christmas Vacation, that's Earth 3, Vegas Vacation, Earth 4. And then we go back to Earth 1 with that 2015 movie that I didn't even bother to see because I knew it was going to be crap. Because I right off the bat, I can tell the 2015 version was just poorly casted to the point where I was just like so turned off by it. But again, we're never going to talk about that movie. So, and of course, Chevy Chase, known for being an asshole on set. Obviously, to this day, Community, was fired from Community, and all the stories we're hearing about what he said racially and whatnot. But he obviously didn't get along with Amy Heckerling either, and she was so like prepared to like leave the set at any time, that she had like a ticket ready to go to New York at any point if she was just so pissed off with Chevy Chase on set that she was just ready to go, which tells you a lot. But she was able to hold it together, and I think she's like the one that holds this train together, or holds this whole project together, because I think Chevy Chase would have just drove everyone nuts. But I think she was able to hold it together with her silliness and the way that she can kind of direct comedy. Like I know Clueless is like the obvious example, but I also like Look Who's Talking 1 and 2. And if you look at those, like there's this really good like balance between comedy and drama and silliness. And here in this case, there's no drama, but the comedy and the silliness is really balanced, because in this case, I think she's the one that made the decision, it feels like, to have Chevy Chase, Clark Griswold, be more of the idiot than the asshole, which we'll get into in the story, because I felt like in the first movie, he's too much of an asshole to like, and he's doing all these asshole things. But in this one, he's just an idiot, and you're just kind of like, oh, Chevy Chase, you're such an idiot, and you just kind of go with it. Tying into that alt-world theory that I just put out there, it kind of ties into the fact that in this movie alone, they spelled the Griswold's name differently. It's spelled with an A as opposed to O. So I thought, okay, is that some kind of clear indication that Amy Heckerling's kind of putting her stamp on the franchise, and this is some alt-world movie? I don't know. I don't know if it was just an error because there was no, I don't know, maybe the continuity department was just not paying attention and they were just asleep at the wheel. But I thought that was really interesting. And you'll notice, too, at the beginning, when they have that awesome opening credit sequence with, like, the passports and stuff, it's clearly, like, all misspelled, but it's just one of those things that the art department kind of just looked over and they just kind of went with it. So I thought that was really funny, and that kind of cements the fact that this is alternate world Griswold. So I thought that was kind of cool. Interesting to note, there's no Cousin Eddie, and I think that's probably a good thing, because Cousin Eddie can get really like on my nerves sometimes. I think Christmas Vacation is the one where they balanced it out the most. Vegas Vacation, he's too much. The first movie, he's too much of an asshole to not like and not even want to give him any money because he's family, that kind of thing. I just wanted to get away from him, or wanted the Griswolds to just get away from him. So having no Cousin Eddie in this one, I think, is a good change of pace, and you focus on the family more of the locations, more having fun with, like, cameos and stuff like that. And John Hughes actually does get a credit for writing it. He does have a credit in the credits, but the thing is, he never wrote the script at all. They just took his old stuff that didn't fit in the first script, and because of the fact that, like, I think it's like the 60% thing, where if you have like 60% of the writing or whatever, depending on ideas or whatever, you get the writing credit. So he gets the writing credit. He didn't even find out about the movie, apparently, until he saw like a commercial for it, which I thought was mind-blowing. And then he ends up getting a check for it, that's typical Hollywood for you. Sometimes they'll just use scripts and not even tell people, kind of like the Hellraiser franchise for a long time. So I thought that was really interesting. And of course, this movie is a big influence on Spider-Man Far From Home in terms of their Euro style trip and the music they play. And of course, if you've ever seen the movie Euro Trip, which is kind of like an obscure comedy, I think the living legacy of Euro Trip is the song Scotty Doesn't Know, sung by Matt Damon. If you know that, comedy heads out there, then you know what I'm talking about. Sort of a cult classic, but it's this idea of going through different locations in Europe, one by one. And essentially what happens to the plot is there's no plot. It just becomes a sequence of vacation spots. But I think in this case, it's okay because it allows the actors to be, a little more free, a little bit, have more fun. And then you have more fun with the locations. And there's not that much pressure of like building up a villain, which they kind of shoehorned in at the third act. There's no really villain in this movie. So I think that's kind of like a plus. And then, like I mentioned before, they're just kind of leaning into the fact that Clark Griswold is stupid. And I think that's a plus.
Yeah, I think turning down the acidity about 20% makes all the difference in the world, because I think it just makes for a better viewing experience. And I know that people love their acidic comedies, and I certainly think that there is a world where that works. But for me, I think just having Chevy Chase be treated as kind of a Homer Simpson-like imbecile just works out really well. I think you get a lot of 80s comedies, you just have it more be about like the road trip aspect of things, and much less so about, oh, here's the plot, here are stakes. There's none of that in this movie. I mean, arguably the biggest stakes of this movie is the daughter wanting to get back to her boyfriend, who is played by William Zabka, which maybe we can get into that in just a couple minutes here. But I want to focus, I think Chevy Chase, for all of his problems, he is a Hall of Fame level physical comedian. And I think you see that, especially when they're in Germany. My favorite sequence is when they're in Germany. And I think that's when Chevy Chase really gets to shine with the physical comedy and the big fist fight that starts at the beer fest. It's really good stuff. And just I am a tremendous admirer of his physical comedy. Again, understanding the fact that he is an asshole that nobody wants to work with and nobody should want to work with. And I would like to think that this kind of behavior will be increasingly less tolerated and that you don't end up in a situation where you have somebody who just is notorious for on every set just being a raging asshole. And the fact that Chevy Chase basically has no career right now, I think is indicative of the fact that he is just such an asshole. Because again, I know that he is older now, but this is somebody who should probably be at least doing cameos in movies, and he's not anymore, unless they're like really terrible, like really low level comedies. I want to talk about Beverly D'Angelo because Beverly D'Angelo was absolutely tremendous in the movie Violent by Night. And Brian, I know you were also a big fan of that movie as well, correct?
Yeah, I got a 7.5 out of 10 out of that one. I just didn't like the colors, but that's just me.
Beverly D'Angelo is a movie where being acidic is actually super helpful because it's not part of the comedy, but she's really good in that. I think she's really good in these movies too. I think she doesn't get a lot of the credit because, look, she wasn't on SNL like Chevy Chase was, but I think this movie works as well as it does because of just her comedic chops, and she is a pleasure to watch. And I think there's a moment when she's naked in the bathtub, and I think that scene could have gone a number of ways. But when she goes diving under the water, when she realizes that it's not her husband in the bathroom with her, I mean, it's really, really funny stuff. And the moment when she's in Italy and trying to run away and all that stuff, I mean, it's just like she really is the one that makes this movie work, because I think the kids are terrible. And this movie, I think, works despite Rusty and the daughter. I just think that this is the weakest casting, which is sad because, like, you had Anthony Michael Hall and you go to this unknown. I think Christmas Vacation has by far the best casting for the kids, one of them being played by Juliette Lewis, who is obviously very notable and just a tremendous actor in her own right. But to me, the weird thing is, and like I understand that Jonathan Galecki is not somebody that people love for his acting skills on Roseanne or Big Bang Theory, but to me, like, he's got the comedic chops to be able to hold his own in a movie like Christmas Vacation. And they get very little to do in that movie, and it's kind of a shame because I think they're two solid performers, and in this movie you get almost nothing from the kids. Like, they have their own storylines. Rusty's super horny, he wants to get laid, seemingly is able to find a way to do so in every country, which is inexplicable to me because this American boy, oh my God, just problematic as hell. And the daughter is concerned about being fat and wants to get back to her boyfriend. And boy, is it weird, Brian. Her storyline, I mean, her performance is also terrible. I don't know if it's her fault. I don't know if she was directed to be as shrill as she was, but that's how it came across.
Well, at the time of filming, I think she was 21, which is the problem, because she seemed too old and she started sounding more adult as the movie got on, and I was like, okay, this is not fitting. That's the only thing that kind of like ruined the performance for me, is that she's too much of an adult in the role, and when she's supposed to be this like really naive like teen. And then you kind of notice the change. Like in the first one, she's like this really, like, Audrey's this really chill stoner girl chick, and then she becomes this like totally different person. I guess that again ties into the idea that's an alternate universe, but it's still like I thought they kind of like did a disservice to her a little bit. But then again, I don't know if it was just Amy Heckerling trying to do this commentary on like fat shaming, but in like kind of a different kind of perspective on it, because that's what it felt like to me. Because like from a female director, I wouldn't kind of expect that kind of thing, but it felt like by the end of it, she accepted that fact that she can't eat and just accepted her body. That's the kind of the message that I got when the fact that she just jumped, or she got dumped at like 2/3 through the movie over the phone. So, but let's get into the plot, because it's kind of like, got to get to the really interesting part first, or at the beginning, because I know the first thing I thought of too, as soon as I saw what happened, I was like, that's a pedophile. But they're on the show, the Griswolds, where they win the trip to Europe on a show called Pig and a Poke. And John Astin, aka Mr. Adams from the original Addams Family series, plays the game show host. He's doing this. God, what's the guy's name? I should have wrote it down. But the guy from Family Feud. He's the bad guy in Running Man. But he's known for like kissing all the
Richard Dawson.
Richard Dawson. He's known for kissing all the female contestants regardless of age, which is kind of like, I look back at that footage and I cringe a lot, but it's just like, wow. They just let him do that on live television, and they kind of make fun of it here. But the fact that Audrey's like 15 and John Astin just goes up and starts making out with her and then proceeds to put his hand on her butt at the end of at the taping. Oh my God. Oh my God. And I don't know if like Amy Heckerling was just like, we should put this in here because it's a real thing, and she wanted to show that like game show hosts are just like pigs themselves or something, because that's the vibe that I was getting by that. I was like, okay, she knows about the Richard Dawson stuff and she knows about this, and she's like showing you that like these game show hosts are not the people that they put themselves out to be. And clearly, yeah, that was the message for me. I don't know about you, but what was your weird take on it?
The opening scene, I think, had its moments. I mean, I think this movie is wildly inconsistent, and I think it's kind of fun. Here's the thing. To me, the fact that this is 93 minutes is one of its greatest strengths, because I think if this movie were 10 minutes longer, I would say it's bad. But it's 90 minutes. It's like, we are going to do everything that we need to in 90 minutes, period. End of story. So is it an unnecessary detour? Maybe. Could we have spent more time in the European countries? Probably. I think it does have a genuinely funny payoff with him saying the name Clark and that being the correct answer. I think that is chef's kiss, perfect, no notes, a great moment, because it gives us the impetus to go with the rest of the plot. I am hopeful. So for this podcast, every podcast has screenshots. I really want to get the screenshot of Chevy Chase's passport photo and the word canceled on it. So if you see that screenshot or this podcast, then you know that I've done my job. That got a big laugh out of me too.
Hindsight's 20/20, huh? Yeah. But I think the other part that you were marking out was that, William Zabka plays the boyfriend, and they're having this dinner or this barbecue, and they're voting on whether or not to go. And I had the same reaction to, like, these kids are like not knowing what the fuck's going on. They should be going to Europe on this once in a lifetime vacation, and they're bitching about not going and wanting to stay. And then Beverly and Angel's like, you know what? Maybe we should just go ourselves, Clark. And Clark's like, no, we're the Griswolds, okay? We go as a family. And then they do the whole voting thing, which I thought was funny. I thought it was even funnier that like Audrey voted for her boyfriend to be president of the family. Hilarious stuff. So they vote to go to Europe. I love the fact that they're all having their own like European dreams of what's to come on the flight. Rusty, I thought, was the funniest one, where he just thought he was the coolest shit in like this European club. And to me, that's one of the top scenes for me, because every time I see that, even on YouTube or something, like I keep laughing so hard because of the little pervy things he's doing, and like feeling girls' hair, because he's like dreaming that he's the only dude in the club, and he's like hot shit. And I think the jacket's even funnier, where it says the Rust Tour or whatever, Rusty the European Tour 1985 or whatever. Man, I just laugh so hard at that, because he just thinks he's the hottest thing in the world. And then you see Clark's dream, where he's doing like, what's that movie? I'm blanking on it right now. What's that? What's
The Sound of Music? It's The Sound of Music.
Sound of Music, and he's doing his own parody with like, he's actually has the lyrics of his own, and he's got like the word shit in it.
The lyrics are really hilarious. I always watch things with subtitles, so I don't think I would have noticed how funny the lyrics were, except I was reading them and I was like, oh, this is actually a pretty funny song. The dreams are very, very good. And I will say, I wish the payoff had been that Rusty continued. I think it actually would have been funnier if Rusty kept getting rejected and wasn't as cool. But it's weird, like his dream is actually pretty accurate to what happens to him in Europe. It's really weird.
Yeah, the Ellen one I thought was funny too, because her dream is that like they go to England and that they're so popular that Diana's like jealous of her, Princess Diana. And I thought the funniest thing was like fucking Chevy Chase coming in and sees Prince Charles and goes, "Hey, Chuck, what's up?" Or just something like that. I thought that was really funny. And I'm pretty sure, like, I have to look it up. I didn't look this up, but I would bet that Queen Elizabeth is the same Queen Elizabeth they used in Naked Gun, because like why else would you have that look That would be the same role technically. I'm going to look it up later, but I'm almost sure that's the same person that plays Queen Elizabeth in Naked Gun. And then, of course, Audrey's dream is about like her getting fat in Europe, which you pointed out was probably an homage to
Monty Python and the Meaning of Life.
It kind of does lead into that because we get Eric Idle in a cameo. But overall, I thought that was
so. It's the Eric Idle part of this is really incredible to me because it's one of the rare times that you have an original SNL cast member and a member of the Monty Python troupe. So I wonder if it's ever happened where you have a Monty Python troupe member, because there is not a lot of crossover. So it's really, really strange to me that's how it turned out. And I would be so curious to know if that's how that worked. So you asked about Queen Elizabeth II. Indeed, she was indeed Queen Elizabeth II in 1988's Police Squad as well. Brian, you will also love this. She is also Queen Elizabeth in Austin Powers' Goldmember.
Unbelievable. There you go. I know my actors, man. I know I might not know the names all the time, but I know the faces, and I was like, what other role have I seen her in? Oh yeah, Naked Gun. So yeah, perfect. So they go to England, and of course Clark can't drive because it's the opposite side of the road. So he gets in 2 accidents like right off the bat. And the funny thing is like all the English people are really nice about it. It's like, oh, it's okay. I needed a new paint job anyway. Thanks for scratching my car. And then eventually he hits Eric Idle in his cameo, and Eric Idle is just like completely like destroyed. His body's destroyed. He needs to go to a hospital. And then he's like, "Oh, it's no worry." I think he says it's just a flesh wound at one point, which is obviously a callback to the other Monty Python movie. Oh my god! And then I think the funniest part, it still gets me, is that he points in a certain direction and the blood just starts squirting out randomly, and Ellen's like, "Oh!" It's just it's this great reaction that Beverly D'Angelo has. And then of course they go to the roundabout. And if you know what a roundabout is, it's kind of like this confusing thing in English roads where they just go in a circle until they attempt to make a left out of it, or right, I don't even know, probably left. But Clark is stuck there for like 2 days or something, and he can't get out. And apparently Chevy Chase got actually like fan mail from people that did travel to England and just got stuck on that thing, and it became this, I guess it's a very relatable experience for Americans trying to drive there. So they destroy Stonehenge on accident, which is, I think it was a miniature or something, because obviously it even looked smaller in scale than the regular one. I think it might have been part of the joke. But of course, Clark knocks it over with his car. And then they go to Paris. In Paris, they go to the Eiffel Tower wearing the stupidest looking berets because Clark thinks they're good. Clark, of course, doesn't want to doesn't want to be the asshole dad. So he throws the hat off along with Rusty because Rusty doesn't like the hat. But there's this dog at the top of the Eiffel Tower, and the dog just jumps and fucking just goes for it. And I couldn't help but think of the first season of What We Do in the Shadows when the vampires fought the werewolves, and all the vampire had to do was throw a bone off the roof, and the fucking werewolf just went for it and just dropped to the fucking ground 5 stories up. That made me laugh a lot. Just at the restaurant scene, man, Jerome, you don't do this, right? Where you travel to other countries and try to like order in their language like an asshole?
I think that actually makes you a bigger asshole when you try to do that. As somebody who has been to other countries, I think you are always trying to be respectful. And I know that living in China, I did a lot of pointing at pictures, which I don't know if that makes me an obnoxious person. Maybe it does, but you kind of rely on the kindness of strangers to help you in those situations. But it would be accurate to say the Griswolds do not behave well in all of these situations, and that is of course part of the comedy. I think this movie, one of its great strengths is that it is really straddling making fun of the Griswolds but also making fun of the countries that they're in, and that is a very fine line, because I think it would be very easy to say, oh, look at these hoity-toity Europeans. They get into that a little bit, but I think the joke is always on the Griswolds too. And I think that's super important. I would imagine that, I think every comedy has to have rules, like specific rules for how their comedy works. And I would imagine keeping the Griswolds as kind of the butt of the jokes at all times is an important aspect to why this film works. And I think the England sequence, the France sequence is pretty forgettable. I think you mentioned the beret joke, but honestly, I think the France part of this is easily the least memorable of the three. I think the English one is hilarious. I think the fact that he gets into the three accidents and that becomes a very quick runner, I think works out really well. Germany is definitely my favorite, but I also want to point out that the voting running gag was very much appreciated, and I have to wonder if Amy Heckerling in her family was this a thing in her family, and is that why it became a thing in this movie? Because I could definitely see that, and I think the voting is a really great running gag that they keep going throughout the movie and kind of pays off in Italy. But for sure, the sequences in Germany are my favorite.
Yeah, so after they get they go to the restaurant, they get their camera stolen at the fountain, which I thought was just like it was so clear that he was going to steal it once they stepped in there. I was like, oh, this guy's just going to run away because there's no way they can catch up with those shoes on. And then the can dance show, which I thought was like, I don't know if it was racist on Asians, or I don't know if it was just like this commentary on like how Asian, I don't know if they were a Japanese culture. I don't know what it is, but they were all Asians in the show except for Clark and Ellen was the only female there. And then in the back, they found Rusty hiding in there with a prostitute. And then it was just weird. It was one of those weird scenes that I don't know if it kind of like works now, because I wasn't really laughing at all. I was just more weirded out of what the fuck is going on and why did they cast like the way they did. But 2020 vision and the way it is, so that scene kind of rubs me the wrong way a little bit. But once they get to Germany, yeah, it gets even funnier again. The home invasion. Now, they commit a home invasion on accident because they're trying to visit their relatives. And, of course, Clark is kind of an imposing fellow and just walks right into this house that says 6 on it, but little does he know it's the house 16. They're supposed to go to house 6. So they never even go to the right house. And so they stay there, and, yeah, they basically did a home invasion. And the couple at the end is like, who the hell were these people? And just shut the door. But lucky for them, they were kind of nice about it. They just kind of like, oh my God, I guess we're hosting this white American family out of nowhere. And the next day they go, I think it's Oktoberfest they go to, I want to say, or it could be just some beer fest or whatever. And Clark is, of course he wants to do the thing where he dresses like the locals and he puts on the Oktoberfest get up, and they ask him to come on stage. And he starts dancing, but the dance gets physical, and he takes it the wrong way and starts a fist fight and starts this giant brawl. And it's so funny because it starts normal like a dance, and the family is like cheering on for him. But then it progressively gets more and more physical to the point where Clark throws the fist, and then they just start brawling, and then like 8 people are brawling on stage, and it just gets wild and out of control. And then it leads to a car chase throughout the small, narrow, like town of like whatever town this is in Germany. He's not even driving on the roads, and the car gets stuck in this alley, and they're running away, and they're just like fuck, and they just leave their luggage. They completely leave their luggage. When I was just like, oh my God, that's bad. That is so bad. I would be freaking out if I lost my luggage in another country. But they just kind of wave it off, and they're just like, let's get on this train and go. And they get on the train, and they end up in Rome, Italy for the last part of the trip, where they try to get their money back from, I don't know how it works. I think it's traveler's insurance or something. But at that time, the location they went to was getting robbed by some mafia something. And they were like, yeah, let's take the money. You know what? Let's take the guy too, so we can have him as a kidnapping ransom. Well, while that's happening, the Griswold walked in. So the guy robbing the place steps in as pretending to be the guy at the counter. He just gives him some money to just fuck off. And then eventually it leads to him coming back and fighting Ellen after Ellen and Clark have a fight. And the reason they have a fight is because there was this videotape that was recorded, or this video recorded on the camera that was stolen in France. And it was a sex tape. And it was like the funniest thing because they filmed this at the beginning of the movie. Beverly D'Angelo, hell of a 2-minute performance on that one. Like I don't know if they had the music in the background because clearly she's singing the vocals, but she's just like leading the charge in that sequence when she's doing the singing with the towel and the teasing. And of course, Clark puts the fucking camera down, not knowing it's recording, and they have a sex tape on accident. And then the people that find it advertise it, and now it's this big hit on VHS in Rome, Italy. And I just love that poster. I thought it was the funniest thing. And then, of course, Ellen's like, Clark, you told me you were going to delete that video. And then, of course, it leads to the fight. She gets drunk, meets the same mafia dude that gave him the money earlier. Leads to him trying to, like, kidnap her or something like that. It gets kind of wild because they kind of throw in all this plot in the third act. Kind of the weak point, kind of the weakness of the story. But they had to have some kind of resolution at the end. Clark goes after her, saves the day, and they go back to America, while also leaving a dent in the Statue of Liberty. Also, like the end credit sequence, just like the opening credit sequence, very creative. In this case, it's just a packet or a highlight package of American stuff because they're back in America, and that's the name of the song. But I know you may have picked up on this too, Jerome, but what other movie that has America in the title have a great sequence of American isms that also has puppets?
Tell me it's a Muppet movie, and I can't remember which Muppet movie it is.
No, it's Team America.
Well, I mean that's technically, it's not a Muppet movie. It is a puppet movie, though. I will tell you.
It is a puppet movie that does have a sequence where they're just like, America, fuck yeah. And it's almost like the same kind of package. And I can't help but think they saw this and were like, hey, let's do that. But we'll put like, porn in it. We'll put nudity and curse words. And yeah, so I thought that was a kind of an influence too on Team America. But that's just me.
Yeah, I think that this movie, I think the Griswolds actually functionally have a vacation this time. Like, they're always mentioning how they're going to museums and whatnot. Like, the first movie, like, they're going into a road trip to a very specific place, and, like, it doesn't really work out. But here, it does seem like there are a lot of off-camera vacation happening moments, which I think is a good thing. I think, obviously, nothing tremendously funny happens at those places, so clearly we're seeing more like a highlight package of things that are going on their European vacation. I think that works out so much better for the sequel, so that you're not really telling the same story. Like, clearly there's other things that are happening off camera, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, so overall, the strengths for me, these are my strengths. I think it's the great comedic direction from Amy Heckerling that I just love, and I love most of her movies that I've seen. Like, I probably all the movies that I've seen of hers I've liked, actually. The ones I haven't seen, I think, are like kind of the more recent ones. But I think her direction's great. The fact that Clark is more of an idiot than an asshole, major plus to the movie. I think the soundtrack's really good. I think she picked the right kind of songs that are like fit what the 80s was at the time. Like that song "Feel the Heat" that Rusty is like dreaming about in the club. I think that was a great song. Plus the pop choices they chose were like French song here and there. Just, multicultural like kind of soundtrack that was very hip and popish. And it's one of those soundtracks I like to listen to like when I study or like, something like that, or doing some work. The memorable gags and jokes and cameos in this one. We got to mention Robbie Coltrane as the guy in the bathroom, aka Hagrid from the Harry Potter movies. Him just because in England, or actually in probably every hotel they were in Europe, there's like a communal bathroom in these hotels, and Clark and Ellen are like looking for the bathroom, and they realize it's a communal one, and of course she's got the thing over her head, and she's talking about, oh Clark, I'm so horny tonight or whatever, and he's just like thinking it's him that she's talking to. So that was hilarious. So I think his cameo was great. Eric Idle's cameo was great. Even John Astin as the Perv was great. I would say William Zabka was kind of a cameo, despite him being like an extended period of time on screen. But it was nice to see him. So just all kinds of good stuff with that. And then I love the opening credit sequence, the way it was the passports, and the end credit sequence was that America tribute. I think we can agree like on all the strengths, right? That's pretty much all of them, right?
Yeah, I would definitely say that you have definitely captured the strengths. I like that Clark and Ellen are actually horny for each other this time, and it's not Clark staring at Christy Brinkley, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, except when you're married. So that always kind of rubbed me the wrong way, that Clark was trying to have simultaneously, like, trying to have this family vacation while also basically stalking this woman. So I really appreciated the fact they took a hard left, pun again not intended, road trip movie. So yeah, I like the fact that they were very much into each other, and yeah, I think those are the strengths. I would just add again that Beverly D'Angelo is really good throughout, and I think it's tough to decipher like very specific things that she did. I just think the way that she plays off of Chevy Chase works out really well.
Yeah, for me, the weakness is like it's not an actual plot. It's just a series of events, and then they kind of throw in that villain Italian mobster guy at the end. Structurally, story-wise, it should not work. But again, this is more like a sequence of events where it's just like, the family's the focus, and they're going on a vacation, and that's kind of like the plot itself. And then the story's simple. There's no complex characters, and I know like nowadays I think in the movies, like comedies nowadays, they'll take that extra 10-15 minutes and develop the characters, make them a little more complex so you have a clear like someone to root for. But in this case, I
think 10 to 15 minutes is generous. Every comedy is 2 goddamn hours now, And I think that's a huge problem. I think the problem is that we don't have a lot of 90-minute comedies. Every comedy now is stretching it to being like an hour 45, 2 hours. Like, and Judd Apatow's even like stretching it to more than 2 hours into 2.5 hours. And I think it's ridiculous. I think the best comedies are this length. I think when you have comedies that go longer, I think it actually creates a big problem and you're getting too much of a good thing. This being 93 minutes, that's one of the reasons that it works.
Yeah, that's also one of my comfort movies. So it's one of those movies you can just put on the background and just relive the jokes, in passing or whatever, and it's still hilarious. Okay, so my MVP, Amy Heckerling, I think she did a great job. She kept the ship afloat, and thank God she didn't walk out on Chevy Chase, because I think the movie would end up like much in a worse position if she would have walked off set. Do you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. I think Amy Heckerling does a really good job here in terms of just getting all these gags, putting it into something that resembles a cohesive movie. I would say she's probably an underrated director at this point. I think a lot of people, when people say Amy Heckerling, like when they write her obituary, like Clueless is probably going to be the first movie that gets mentioned. Maybe Fast Times, but I feel like especially among our generation and younger, Clueless is the movie that people are going to remember of hers.
Yeah, and of course, best performance has got to be Chevy Chase, but Beverly D'Angelo did really hold her own on this one, especially like when she was getting drunk at the end with the bad guy, and she was like kind of reliving the beginning moments of the movie, and she was like, and I did the ba 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 ba, and she just kind of relives it. She did a great job at that. So yeah, a good, strong number two. You agree, right? Chevy Chase is the best performance.
Yeah, I think it's got to be
Yeah.
Chevy Chase. I mean, I again, Beverly D'Angelo is really strong, but so much of the focus is on Chevy Chase. You have to give it to him. And again, the kids are terrible.
Okay, so for this series of podcasts, we're going to be doing this last category, underrated. Of course, as the host, I'm proposing it. I'm saying yes. Jerome, your vote.
I'm going to say yes. I say we are 1-for-1 in agreement on whether these movies are underrated, and I think we're going to do this for all 8.
Hopefully, we'll see. We'll see. But that's it for this episode. This is not necessarily the only comedy we're going to be tackling. There's some other genre comedies we'll be tackling. I'm not going to reveal anything yet, but we are going.
I think we should at least tease the next week's movie. We don't necessarily need to go through our list, but I think we should tease the following week's movie, and your choice, because we are going in chronological order. You also have next week's movie as well. That's just kind of a quirk that you are ending up with. You're basically ending up with, like, I think 4 of the first 5 or 3 of the first 4.
Yeah, mine
sure.
are more like 80s, 90s kind of movies, but I'm not going to fully reveal the title yet. I'll just say this. It's a horror movie. It's a sequel. Arguably, people love it as the best of the series. And let's just say this, if you go to Walmart every once in a while and you look at those like graphic tees in the graphic tee section, guaranteed you saw this movie as a t-shirt there, because I've seen people wear this t-shirt everywhere, like in like wrestling shows, the mall, even Vegas. I've seen people wear the shirt. So I'm telling you, it's one of the more underappreciated sequels that has like kind of found its like light, so to speak, or like its fandom more recently, I think. But we'll reveal that next week, and it's kind of relevant with Stranger Things. So I'll just leave it at that.
More specifically, the Midnight Club, I would say, is much more of an homage to the movie that we are discussing next week.
And so that's it for this week. I'm your host, Brian DeBrain, and I'll be hosting next week. Talk to you soon.
Listen, if Brian and I ever go on a vacation together, we will not make the mistake of bringing children.